Hey, what's going on, folks? This is Balaji with Brave Young Heroes, and we have the session that I've been waiting for to share with you guys. Wait till you hear about this young lady I got sitting right next to me. Now, she is a licensed psychologist and health service provider. She specializes in working with kids and adolescents with high-functioning autism spectrum disorders, ADHD, anxiety, depression, and maybe people who struggle with social skills like me. Okay, she's passionate about helping parents connect with their children in order to cultivate loving and supportive interactions. She's a mom to an amazing 6-year-old and an even more amazing 11-year-old version of that 6-year-old, and she's worked in public schools to help kids with their social, emotional, and behavioral concerns. Please help me welcome this Raleigh, North Carolina native, this local superhero, Dr. Emily King. Welcome.
Thank you. That was quite an introduction. Thanks for having me.
Your reputation precedes you. I'm a big fan of your work. I first heard you on our mutual friends, the Holderness podcast, and I was
so
like,
fun.
Yes, I was like, this lady, she needs to come help me with my issues. So I'm just being transparent.
Here I am.
Yeah, here you are. Now, we do have to provide a disclaimer since you are a licensed psychologist. So folks, the information being provided is for informational and educational purposes only. It's not intended to be a substitute for professional medical or psychological diagnosis, advice, or treatment. So basically, we're saying consult your own personal physician, right? Regarding how much of this you can apply to your child's symptoms or medical condition. Make sense? With that being said, yes, Dr. Emily, we appreciate you being here. Your specialty is something that is near and dear to my heart because you help kids with social and emotional skill.
Right.
Why is that even a thing? Let's be honest. If our kids, as long as they are safe, they've got food, shelter, and they're doing well academically, they're going to be successful in life. So what's with all this touchy-feely, like, feelings?
So those are all important in the long run, but I would make the argument that social emotional success is even more important than academic success.
Whoa.
They of course go hand in hand in tandem, but for young children, we see greater outcomes of being able to work in a group, being able to feel positive self-esteem, when they can regulate themselves alone first and then be able to regulate themselves in a group, and then the learning comes, then the academics come. If anyone has ever felt super stressed before, you can connect with this idea of, if you're super stressed, it's really hard to listen to someone talking to you about something else. It's really hard to learn in that moment that you are your emotional part of your brain has been hijacked basically by the stress of what's happening, and you can't think clearly. That happens to kids too, and it especially happens to young kids that haven't developed the cognition that it takes to problem solve these things.
Right. I mean, okay, so logically, I can latch onto that, Dr. Emily. That makes sense. But I think a lot of us parents struggle from this standpoint. I don't get stressed in that particular situation. Or that's a social skill that is not difficult for me. You're my child. Why can't you just do it?
So as parents, we have a fully developed brain. We are firing on all of our cylinders. We have much more executive functioning than our children do in terms of planning, in terms of impulse control. We also have life experiences that have taught us what's going to work and what's not going to work. Our kids don't have that yet. They are in the middle of learning this, and it's our job to be there calm in these moments where they are learning how to regulate themselves and solve these problems. The other big thing to remember is that even though there are developmental differences between a child and an adult, they are their own person. They could not be wired like you at all, and you have to figure out what works for them. How does their wiring connect to make sense of this problem when That's not the way you would have gone about it, but it is still a fine way to go about it.
Mm, this is one that I think a lot of us struggle with. Maybe it's a bit of a human condition, because all of these life experiences that you've talked about have informed us as to, it's almost like the formula for success, right? Like, okay, I had all these struggles, all these pitfalls when I was a kid, when I was a teen. So now I know how I finally figured out after 3 or more decades, now I finally get how life works. Now I'm trying to help you, kid, to not make those same mistakes. And but it seems like applying the things that work for us don't always work for our kids.
That's true. And also, we have to learn from the mistakes happening to us. So we can share stories about things that happened to us and how we solved it. And some children, that's all they need is a story. And then they can change course and say, well, my mom or dad taught me something today. Some kids, they have to actually get out there and try it themselves. Sometimes that's a personality thing. They're not going to take your word for it. They're going to go and they're going to try it their way. Then they fail or they succeed and they learn something from that, and it can't be taught just by speaking with them. They have to go and fail at something, or they have to go and try it their own way to be successful.
I love that you bring up that point, Doc, because sometimes our kids are capable of performing certain skills, certain behaviors, whether it's chores or looking adults in the eye or making conversation. They're capable, but they're not interested for whatever reason. Right? Other times we might have neurodiverse kids who maybe don't actually have that ability.
Right. So we've got, in a neurotypical child, we have skills that they're developmentally going to hit these milestones by the piece of paper that your pediatrician gives you at your well visits, plus or minus some months. And you expect those milestones to happen. And then you have some motivation in there as well. The child may not be socially motivated. They may be a little bit socially anxious, although they may not have a diagnosis of anxiety. And then we have neurodiverse kids who have an evaluation that has identified this skill is lagging behind developmentally, or this is autism. And these are all the ways that this child struggles in these situations. And then we don't have a roadmap. The evaluation is the closest thing to a roadmap as we can have, but they're still moving targets. So therapists are working with your child to figure out where to go next. And we always have to be trying to find where is that child's learning zone, so that I'm not expecting them to do something higher than their ability, because when we do that, we usually get negative behavior because something's too hard and stressful. And where am I not pushing enough or even enabling my child and not pulling them up to where I think they can go? So that's a more complex, obviously much more complex way of parenting. That's what I specialize in. But then when we even with the neurotypical children, it can be hard sometimes to figure out what's a skill deficit. This is something Dr. Ross Green talks a lot about, of if kids can do it, they will do it. If they can, they will. And so if they're not doing it, we have to figure out why. Is it motivation? Is it lack of skill? Is there an underlying anxiety there that's stopping them? We have to be detectives and figure that out for them, because they don't know how to articulate it.
Yeah, I think this is a really important point, Doc, because I'll give you an example. That my younger son, I coach his soccer team, and goodness, he's not the only one. Probably 3 or 4 kids on this 12-kid team. Every practice, every game, there are shoelaces. Just like, woo, the shoelaces do not stay tied. And that has been a point of frustration for me for many years. It was a point of frustration, because it's like, okay, when you're 5, all right, all 5-year-olds, I guess, are learning how to tie their shoelaces. So we get the book with the shoelaces on it, and we practice with you, and we have the fat shoelaces, we do all the things, right? And, okay, now you're 7. And a lot of 7-year-olds already know how to tie their shoelaces. But okay, you have a master's. Okay, that's fine. I'll still help you out. But now you're 9 years old, and it feels like that milestone was 4 years ago. And, the Joneses across the street, little Billy Jones and Sarah Jones, can tie their shoelaces. Why can't you tie your... And it's frustrating to us parents when our kids seem to be lagging behind. Now, I should point out that the same kid whose shoelaces won't stay tied, my 9-year-old, he does calculus for fun. So,
which are two very different skills.
Very different skills, but also
Right.
sometimes I think as parents, maybe because we're stressed, maybe because we lack sleep, maybe because our expectations aren't being met, we feel like our kids should hit all the milestones right on time.
Mm-hmm.
And if they're behind in just a few, we almost seem to paint the kids with a broad brush and say, oh my goodness, I need like counseling for this child because they can't tie their shoelaces.
So
what's going on there?
Right. So what's going on there is that tying shoes has a lot of different skills in it, along with a lot of other motor tasks. But an occupational therapist would be the one to talk with further about this. But there's fine motor, there's lateral movement, crossing the midline, where you have to cross your hands over to do things. A lot of kids that struggle with tying shoes struggle to ride a bike or learn strokes when they're swimming. It is something with their bilateral movement that is this, if it's a skill issue. Some kids have an emotional barrier where they think they have to do it perfectly, or they want to do it, so they won't even begin because they just have to do it, and it's easier if they're not going to succeed. It's easier just to not do it to begin with. So we've got to get at what the skill issue is there. But the bigger issue you're mentioning is, as parents, especially if we have a bright child that we're looking at that's successful in a lot of different areas, we do struggle to reconcile weaknesses that we see. And if we don't get to the bottom of what the skill issue there, we sometimes assume that it's a lack of trying or a lack of motivation, or they're just trying to make our morning difficult, which is how we feel at first when we can't get, especially with those can't get out the door behaviors in the morning that are stressful. But if we're a few years behind in a developmental skill, it is worth getting that checked out by a professional to see what is the skill issue here. Can this child do this? Or are there other motor systems that are not working together that are making this harder? And does this child need some sort of targeted teaching beyond what a parent knows of just, repetition and looking at YouTube videos about how to tie shoes, that could help. And if you're frustrated, the child's frustrated too. And so you have to remember, we may be a little bit frustrated with it, but from their perspective, they're looking at other kids who have that skill and they don't. So their self-esteem is involved, where it's really just our frustration is involved. But they may not be able to articulate again what that is.
Right.
What that feels like.
Right. Okay, so we were just talking about shoelace tying.
Yes.
But as a kid, a lot of what you're describing, I can relate to with social skills. So I did well at school, but socially I was very shy. Now I'm also an introvert, but I didn't even know what that was as a kid, naturally. But I knew what shy was. And I was very self-aware, Doc, that I'd be in social situations and groups or whatever, and I would keep second-guessing myself, like, okay, don't say that. What if they think this about you? Or they're thinking about your shoes or how you're dressed. I was convinced that everybody was thinking about me, and it made me so reticent to put myself out there. But it's almost sort of like a vicious cycle. Because I was hesitant to practice social skills, well, I didn't develop my social skills, got worse, and it kind of circled lower and lower, and so it impacted the self-esteem. And it probably took me into my 20s before I finally started to build those social skills to the point where I no longer identify myself as a shy person. I'm still an introvert, though. I still love my alone time. But I have a comfort in social situations that just did not exist as a kid. So I relate to your point that kids often are aware that they're struggling with something.
Right. And we are doing a much better job as parents in this generation, talking way more openly than when we were growing up about what is introversion and what is extroversion. And in our culture, especially in America, I think that a lot of extroversion is rewarded with jobs and sales jobs and people in the media and things that just are out there that you see look like success. But there's many, many ways to be successful as an introvert that we're talking a lot more with our kids about. So that's a good thing. So I think that where we need to start with kids is figuring out, what do they want socially? So an introvert may just want